Hey guys, it's Kira and today I'm going to be sharing with you some of the classics I'm hoping to read in 2020. Lucy from Lucy the Reader is running like a classics community challenge this year, which I think is super exciting and probably exactly what I need to actually push me to start reading more classics again, because basically the aim is just to make sure that you read more classics and that's all there is to it. But I think it's nice that there's kind of like more of a community there. There's not like any specific challenges that I'm aware of, but I think there's going to be some group reads and just in general having that community there who also are people that love classics is going to be really fun. So I'm really excited to actually get back into reading some classics. I absolutely love classics in and amongst all of the other genres that I read, but I found that towards the end of last year I kind of abandoned them a little bit just because I was really trying to focus on meeting my Goodreads goal for the year, and classics tend to be a little bit on the longer side, and so I just kind of like didn't pick them up as much just because I wanted to make sure that I reached my goal for the year. But this year I'm going to try and make sure that I'm reading like hopefully at least one classic a month, if not more. And obviously there might be some months where I fancy reading more classics and others where I just don't get around to one, but in general I really enjoy them and I think it's really fun to try and read them all, and I have so many on my shelves, so I'm really looking forward to actually delving into them and like sort of taking off from my classics TBR. So without further ado, I'm just going to talk you through the books. I've got 9 here, but of course I might end up picking more up throughout the year, but for now I'm just going to talk you through the 9 that already exist on my shelves and that I'm super excited to get to. So the first classic on my TBR is one that's been on my shelves for way too long. I don't know why I haven't gotten around to it yet, but that book is Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. Now I bought this book at least a couple of years ago now because I fell in love with the cover. This was actually the first Penguin Deluxe classic that I bought because I just could not resist this cover. It was so beautiful and I needed it on my shelves because I love having beautiful covers. And since buying this book, it's kind of like kick-started a bit of an addiction slash problem with buying Penguin Deluxe classics because I now own so many of them because they all have the most beautiful artwork. But I've actually read a lot of the other ones, but for some reason I never gotten around to reading this one, which was the first one that I picked up. But I'm really looking forward to getting into it because I really want to get back into reading a little bit more Jane Austen. I've read I think 3 of her books so far. I picked up Persuasion when I was in university, that was on my course, and then I've also read Northanger Abbey since then, and also Pride and Prejudice, and I really enjoyed all of them. Particularly loved Northanger Abbey just because I think it's a really fun kind of like satire play on the Gothic genre, and I actually really like the Gothic genre when it comes to classics. Like Frankenstein is one of my absolute favourites, as is Dracula, so I really enjoy that kind of like satire play on that genre. But Sense and Sensibility is one that I don't know much about, but I'm really excited to read because I think it kind of centres around the relationship between sisters, and I'm sure being that it's a Jane Austen novel there will be an element of romance in there as well because all of her books have that little sort of theme to them, and I'm really looking forward to getting into this one and finally reading this absolutely gorgeous book. Another book collection that I ended up buying mostly based on how beautiful the covers were was the vintage collection of Russian classics. Now so far of those books, I think there's 6 of them in total. I've read the 2 Tolstoy ones, so War and Peace and Anna Karenina, both of which I absolutely love. Anna Karenina is a particular favourite of mine, but in general I think Tolstoy is incredible. But my boyfriend Jay, who also bought those classics with me because we both just fell in love with the covers, he actually ended up reading all of them last year, which is an incredible achievement, and he loved so many of them, but there were 2 in particular that he really liked, and those are Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, which I can't believe I managed to say that without making a mistake in his name because that is a tricky name to pronounce. But Crime and Punishment is one that Jay, I think it was his first one that he picked up, and he absolutely loved it. Like he properly got into this story and really enjoyed it. He hasn't actually told me all that much about it because I think it's sort of the kind of thing that it's good to sort of go into with an open mind and just sort of experience the story for yourselves. But I am hoping to kind of make my way through at least a few more of those Russian classics this year and see if I like these ones as much as I like Tolstoy. So of course the first 2 that I've read have been by the same author, and I obviously know I just enjoy his writing style, whereas with these other ones I'm not sure whether I'll be as keen on those authors or whether I'll sort of like vibe with their writing styles as much. But I'm certainly excited to read this one, and I find that Jay often gives really good recommendations when it comes to classics because he really enjoys them, so hopefully I'll enjoy this one a lot. And then the other Russian classic I'm hoping to pick up is one that we do also have in the vintage collection, but then because Jay enjoyed it so much, I think it was actually his favourite of the Russian classics, he also ended up buying it in the Penguin Deluxe Classic editions. So I'm sure, as you can tell, we both have a massive problem in this relationship with buying like books in multiple quantities because we just can never resist when one of our favourites has a beautiful cover. So we have almost no space on our bookshelves at the moment because we both have such a book buying problem. But the book I'm talking about is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. Bulgakov, which, as I said, I believe was Jay's favourite of the Russian classics, and he talked about this one with such high praise, and I think he really enjoyed it. Now, what I've gathered about this book, without sort of learning too much about the plot or giving too much away, is that it has a very bizarre narrative style. I believe one of the main characters is a cat, like a large cat, like a jaguar or something like that. So that is obviously a very interesting and unique and quite bizarre sort of narrative style. And I think in general the book is very sort of eccentric and sort of wild in its sort of narrative style, but I'm really intrigued to read about that because I do really enjoy those books that are kind of a bit weird, but just kind of like use that weirdness to delve into topics that maybe you wouldn't necessarily go as deep into if it was just focused in sort of the modern world or with sort of normal people. I think it's really interesting when authors can use something that's quite odd and sort of bizarre to really delve into an interesting topic. So I'm hoping I'll really enjoy this one and I'll get some interesting stuff from it. And then, based on an absolutely incredible film that's in the cinemas at the moment, I think the book on this TBR that I'm the most excited to read would have to be Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, because I just fell in love with the new adaptation of this film. Absolutely loved it. It was so captivating, and I just cannot like even put into words how much I loved the film. So I can't wait to get into the book and hopefully enjoy it just as much as the film, because if the film is anything to go by, this story is just incredible, and I can only imagine that there's even more detail in the book that the film probably just couldn't include because of time limits. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it. I personally find that in books, whether in classics or in contemporaries, I just really enjoy books that centre around a family dynamic. I just think it's really interesting to see how these families interact with one another, and in this book in particular, where you've got four sisters who are each so different from one another but still have such a close bond, there's just a really interesting dynamic that I'm super excited to read about. I also haven't read all that many American classics. I find typically that I've read a lot more British classics, probably just because I studied English literature at a British university, and so a lot more of the books on my sort of like course syllabus and everything just centered more around sort of British classics and British literature. So I haven't had all that much insight into American literature when it comes to classics, and I'm really looking forward to reading this one, which is probably one of the most well-known and well-loved American classics out there. So I can't wait to give this one a read. And the next book on my TBR is one that I've actually been inspired to pick up by Lucy, because I've heard her talk about this book quite a lot of times and always with such high praise, and that is Far From the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. I've actually never read a Thomas Hardy before, and I'm really looking forward to getting into it and just seeing whether I like his writing style or not. But I thought that because Lucy is obviously such a classics queen and has such brilliant opinions, that reading this one, which she's talked so highly about, would be a perfect introduction into his works. I'm also really keen to watch the film adaptation, which has Carey Mulligan in it, because I love Carey Mulligan, particularly in The Great Gatsby as Daisy, but I really just want to see her in Far From the Madding Crowd as well. But I don't want to watch the film until I've read the book, so I'm hoping to be able to do both of those things this year and hopefully love the story as much as Lucy does. In general, I think this sounds like a really intriguing story that centres around a scandal, particularly around this one woman, Bathsheba, who is sort of seen as an object of scandal because of her relationships with three separate men. And so I don't know much other than that, which is what this basically tells you on the blurb, but I'm really intrigued to see how the scandal sort of plays out within the book and just see whether I like Thomas Hardy's writing style. Next up, we've got a book that I was actually bought by Jay for my birthday last year, which was in May, so it's been obviously several months since then by now, and I still haven't gotten around to reading it, and that is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. And I'm actually quite glad that I haven't read this one yet, because I believe this is actually one of the books Lucy's going to be hosting the classics community sort of like buddy read with, so I think everyone's going to be reading this one at some point this year, and I'm really looking forward to being able to read it along with some other people, because buddy reads are always so much fun, and particularly with classics, because they're not necessarily so talked about on BookTube. It's really nice to be able to do them as part of a buddy read, so that you can actually talk to other people about your thoughts with these books and just sort of see how everyone feels about them as they go. Now, I don't know much about this book, and I haven't actually read anything by Elizabeth Gaskell before, but I do think this one sounds particularly interesting, especially from the perspective of someone who lives in the north of England, because I think this book basically is what kickstarted the North-South divide, which is still kind of like a jokeable debate that goes on between people in England and sort of Great Britain in general. There's always kind of a joke about the North-South divide, and I thought it would be really interesting to probably read about something which talks about that topic in a much more serious way, because it looks at kind of the sort of difference in sort of society and lifestyle in the north of England, which was much more industrial, and then versus the south. So I thought that would be really interesting, just because now the North-South divide is such a sort of like just basically a joke between people, whereas in this book I'm sure it'll be a much more serious topic, which I think will be really interesting to read about. Next up, I've actually got a couple more books that Jay bought me for my birthday because clearly I'm just terrible at reading the books on my TBR. The first one is Middlemarch by George Eliot, which I'm really looking forward to getting into because I read one George Eliot book, The Mill on the Floss, when I was at university, and I actually really enjoyed that one. I read it as part of a Victorian literature module, and I found it to be a very captivating story because it follows basically a brother and sister as they kind of like grow up and the troubles that they face and the different paths that they go down and where it sort of leads them based on the different choices that they make. And I really enjoyed that kind of narrative style where you follow someone for so many years and see that sort of gradual development of their character and the gradual sort of development of the relationship between brother and sister and how that changes as the characters get older. So I really enjoyed that one. So I'm looking forward to reading more George Eliot because I found that her writing style was very intriguing and captivating in my opinion. Now, like quite a lot of the books in this TBR, I don't actually know too much about Middlemarch going in. I'm the kind of person that doesn't like to know too much about books when I'm going into them, just because I think it's nice to be able to experience them for yourself and just see what you think of them. But knowing that I really like George Eliot's writing style from The Mill on the Floss, I'm hoping that this one will be just as captivating. What I do know about this book is that it kind of centres around a town which is being changed by some sort of industrial revolution. I believe like the introduction of a railway is the thing that is, speaking of railways, a train is obviously going past the house right now, lol. But I believe that this book centres around this town Middlemarch, which is being sort of affected by the Industrial Revolution, and we kind of focus on a few different characters from the town and how their lives are sort of panning out. And I'm hoping that based on The Mill on the Floss, that this is a book that takes place over quite a long period of time, so that we can sort of follow the characters and see how their lives are affected by this revolution. But I actually know nothing about it, so I might be completely wrong in my opinion and my hopes. I'm certainly looking forward to reading it and seeing what happens, and I'm sure that because it's written by someone whose writing style is so captivating and who manages to develop characters so well, that I'll enjoy the book no matter what it's about. So the next book that I'm picking up is one that I'm super excited to read. It was again one that Jay bought me for my birthday, and one that I'm really surprised that I haven't read yet because I found it to be such an interesting topic, and whenever I talk about or think about this book, I can only think about how intriguing the subject matter sounds, but for some reason I just have never picked it up yet, and that is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now this is an American classic, and like I said, I haven't read too many American classics, but this one in particular is particularly intriguing to me because, as well as being an American classic, it's also just in general about a topic that I haven't read much about, so I'm really looking forward to reading it because it sounds so intriguing. It's set in a Puritan village, which is a sort of issue that I've never read much about. I've never really come across sort of a book that explores like the Puritan religion or anything like that, so I'm really interested to find out more about it. And in this book we follow a woman called Hester who is forced to wear a scarlet letter A in order to mark herself as an adulteress because she has a child outside of marriage. And so it basically follows her, I guess, as she is forced to sort of bear her sins to the world, and sort of looks at the effect of that not only on her but also on the child that she has outside of wedlock. Now to me this just sounds like such an interesting topic because the Puritans were so strict and so particular about the rules and regulations about how people could and couldn't behave, and so this sort of forced admittance of the sins that Hester has committed to everyone in society is just going to be really interesting to read about and see how she feels, obviously as someone who chose to commit something that she knew was a crime in the society that she lived in, and how that sort of impacts the treatment of her and the treatment of herself, and sort of herself sort of view is going to be really interesting, and I'm personally really looking forward to reading this one and seeing how it deals with that subject because I find it so interesting. And then the final book I've got on this classics TBR is one that I'm so excited to read because it's by an author who I absolutely love, and that book is The House on the Strand by Daphne du Maurier. Now it's no surprise when I say that Daphne du Maurier is one of my all-time favourite authors because I have never read a book of hers that I haven't enjoyed, and I'm just absolutely desperate to read more of her works because everything she writes is just so incredible, and I think the way that she creates these vivid worlds and very dark but intriguing stories is just so incredible. This one in particular sounds very interesting and quite unique because it basically follows a man who I believe is offered some drugs by his friend, and when he takes these drugs he is transported through time to a 14th century world, and I think that over time he becomes kind of addicted to this world. And I think the book basically focuses on him using these drugs and this transportation to a different time as a sort of means of escapism, and it kind of shows not only his addiction to drugs but also his addiction to this new place that he just wants to be all the time. And I guess it's kind of that sort of contrast between realism and escapism, and I think it's going to be a really interesting book, which I think sounds very unique, and I'm sure, given that it's written by such an incredible author, this will be an absolutely amazing book, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. So those are the 9 classics books that I'm putting at the top of my TBR for this year, and I'm really excited to read them, particularly along with everyone else that's taking part in this Classics Community Challenge, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what everyone else reads throughout this year as well, and just chatting about classics to people, because I feel like I don't do it enough, but it's something that I absolutely love to do, and I'm really looking forward to sort of really delving into this challenge, reading more classics, and just having an amazing time doing it. So if you've read any of the classics I'm planning on reading, please let me know your thoughts on them, because I'd love to know which ones you found the most amazing, and if you've got any particular recommendations or ones that you think I should try and get to first. But if not, just let me know which classics you're going to be hoping to read in 2020. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.